Hello and welcome to Squatchspot. I'm Darren Smith, and I hope that all of you are doing okay and that you and your loved ones are well. Today, I was in much need of a spirit boost, and I am out in the field conducting some Sasquatch research and creating a YouTube video for all of you. And I really found that being out in nature and engaged in a project of creating a YouTube video is definitely a major mood boost for me. So it's an absolute thrill to be out here in this beautiful environment and to be engaged in this project. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be out here, and I'm absolutely overjoyed to have all of you here with me. And so today I am up on that ridge where I had my encounter on March 3rd, 2020. However, I moved much higher up on the ridgeline to a much higher elevation, and I went as far as I could until I discovered a bunch of tree falls on the road that made it impossible for me to continue. However, we are in a good location, and I am out here trying to pinpoint where the Sasquatch are located and where they are moving through. Because as I mentioned, the Sasquatch are on the move now. They are making their seasonal migration from those lower elevations up to those higher elevations for the warmer summer months. And it would be very strategic for us if we could pinpoint their movement patterns as they're making this seasonal migration. Now, I have a good idea of how they are getting to and fro. However, I definitely want to be out in the field gathering more physical evidence to support my theories of their movement patterns, because if we can really hammer down their exact movement patterns during this seasonal migration, it's going to be much easier for us to encounter them in the future and much easier for us to anticipate their location and their potential movement patterns, because I do believe animals are generally creatures of habits, and I do think that once we are able to identify their movement routes, I think that we are going to discover that they utilize these same routes in the future. So I think it's very important that we spend as much time out in the field conducting this research, because although it's going to be very difficult for us to pinpoint their location and to keep up with them, if we can ascertain that movement pattern, it's going to be a huge benefit for us and our research. So that's what I'm doing out in the field. I am getting my nature, my project engagement, and I am out in the field trying to find that physical evidence that the Sasquatch are moving through these areas. So our primary mission today is to continue our investigation of this ridge and to try to determine the route the Sasquatch are taking during their seasonal migration. This strategic timing in the field is critical to our research, because if we can determine the Sasquatch's migration routes, it will make it much easier for us to anticipate their movement patterns in the future and to target probable encounter areas. And what makes this immediate timing critical, the roads leading into the area are still blocked with tree falls and heavy debris, so the tourists and weekend warriors are still at bay, which means any physical evidence the Sasquatch have left behind as they move through the area is very likely still there, and our mission is to find it. I have mentioned this numerous times on previous videos. However, here in the California Sierra Nevada mountains, we have had an incredible amount of devastation caused by the infamous pine beetle, which is responsible for killing tens of millions of trees along the California Sierras all the way up to the Oregon border. And I have mentioned this before, that I do believe that this debris in the forest does create a challenge for the Sasquatch when moving through the environment. And I know there are quite a few of you out there who disagree with me on this. However, I do believe, based on the amount of debris that is in the forest as a result of these fallen trees, I absolutely believe the Sasquatch are using these desolate forest roads when making their migration up to those higher elevations. And especially this year, because the snow melted off very late in the season. So I think the Sasquatch are going to want to make their seasonal migration as quickly as possible. And I think these desolate forest roads offer them a great opportunity to make this move quickly and quietly, because absolutely there is nobody out on these desolate forest roads when the Sasquatch are generally moving around, which is generally between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. So I do know there are quite a few of you out there who disagree with me on this point. However, based on my investigation of these roadways, I have had a lot of success in the past, which definitely leads me to believe that the Sasquatch are using these roads when making their seasonal migration. And I also think that the numerous roadside crossings that we are getting reported is definitely an indication that the Sasquatch are moving along these roadways. When you're exploring the areas along the roads, use extreme caution, safety first, stay off the road, and always maintain awareness of your surroundings. Also, as you investigate these areas along the road, take time to investigate tree clusters and brushy areas near the road. These are ideal bedding areas where the Sasquatch will rest a bit before continuing on their journey, or they will hunker down there when vehicles pass. Pay attention. These rest stops will provide DNA. Another place I spend a lot of time investigating when I'm out in the field are waterways, because I believe these animals are going to need a tremendous amount of water. And I know there are some of you out there who believe I'm taking the wrong approach here, thinking that these are animals and that they have the same requirements as, say, a bear or a deer. However, I do believe that these beings do drink water, and I do think they fall into a category of relic hominid or unidentified ape species. So I definitely think they are drinking water, and I think that the Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967 did add a lot of credibility to this theory, because as Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin moved into Bluff Creek in the area where they encountered the Sasquatch, they did say that she was there at the river, at the banks, and it is a very good possibility that she was drinking. And I think that's why they were able to surprise her as they came up on their horseback, because getting close to the river, you've got a lot of noise and a lot of sound coming from the water. So I think it is easy to overlook other environmental sounds, because that water is just drowning out the other sounds in the area. And I think that's what happened on October 20th, 1967, when Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin captured that forever famous film footage. But that being said, when you're investigating waterways, use extreme caution, and it's always advisable to have somebody there with you. You should never get into the water or get in close proximity to it, where if you were to fall and land into the water, because rivers are extremely dangerous. And here in Yosemite National Park and the surrounding areas, there are some researchers who believe that the clusters of missing persons that they are discovering is evidence that the Sasquatch are somehow involved in the disappearance of these individuals. And I absolutely disagree with this, because I know a number of individuals in emergency services, and these areas where these individuals are going missing, there are some environmental hazards there where a lot of people have unfortunate situations occur, and the majority of these environmental hazards are waterways. And crossing a river is absolutely something you should not do. And in this area in Yosemite National Park, there is a river that is infamous at claiming lives. And unfortunately, a lot of times these bodies are never recovered. So you can see how if somebody goes into an environment alone, especially these waterways, and they decide to get into the water or cross the water, and if they do have a mishap, a lot of times they will appear to have gone missing, which they have, but it was because of an accident, and that accident took place in water. So absolutely use extreme caution when getting anywhere near water. And also, another thing you have to keep in mind here along these rivers is I encounter a lot of snakes either drinking in the rivers or sunning themselves on the rocks around the rivers. And up here we have, of course, rattlesnakes, and they definitely pose a significant risk to human lives if you were to encounter one of them and have the unfortunate situation of being bitten by one. So that is definitely something you have to be aware of when you are investigating waterways. Stay clear of the water so you do not have a mishap slipping on the rocks and falling into the water. And absolutely keep a close eye out for any sort of snakes that may be sunning themselves on the rocks around the river. So where am I focusing my efforts when I'm out and about and I'm looking for that physical evidence that the Sasquatch are moving through an area? Well, as I already mentioned earlier, I definitely spend a lot of time along the roadways, especially investigating the game trails that are crossing the roadways, because I generally believe animals are creatures of habit, and I believe they cross the roads often at set locations, and I think the Sasquatch will also be utilizing those same game trails when coming out of the forest and crossing the roads. And I also spend a lot of time in these marshy areas because the ground here is so moist, it makes the perfect medium for which to find those footprint impressions that we're looking for. And it's also a great place to be observing wildlife. So it is definitely a good idea to kind of set up your little observation area and just sit there and watch the environment. And oftentimes I will pull myself out of the meadow a ways and get up into the tree cover and just kind of sit there quietly and observe these marshy areas. And oftentimes you will see deer come into the area and other animals, and you'll also be able to see a lot of interesting birds. And I also spend a lot of time along the perimeter of these marshy areas looking for those footprint impressions, because that definitely is the perfect place to be finding them. So I'm going handheld here just so I can show you guys what I am talking about here. But when you're out looking for that physical evidence, we're looking for those footprint impressions. And when you're out investigating an area, you kind of want to keep in mind that you want to get to locations where you can find a medium that is conducive for those footprint impressions. Now I'm going to swing the camera around here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But when you're moving through the forest floor is littered with debris, and this pine forest floor is really not conducive for those footprint impressions. But now, if you can get out to this soft dirt that you see here around the roads, these forest roads, you can find this soft powder that is conducive for footprint impressions. And if you can time your investigation for after a slight rainfall where this ground is going to be moist, you really can have a lot of success along these forest roads, because oftentimes the Sasquatch will cross the road. However, as soon as the weekend warriors get up here and they start driving on these roads heavily, we're going to lose a lot of those footprint impressions. So it's really a good idea to try and get up into the woods before the heavy traffic starts getting up into the area, and to be looking for that physical evidence along these forest roads, because there is a medium here that is conducive for those footprint impressions that we're looking for, and it's really something that you don't want to overlook. So definitely spend a little time along these forest roads, these dirt forest roads, looking for that physical evidence. I spent the entire day conducting field research along this ridge I have been investigating, and I covered an incredible amount of ground. However, I did not find any physical evidence of Sasquatch activity. As I mentioned previously, it is going to be incredibly difficult to pinpoint the Sasquatch's location while they are on the move during their seasonal migration. However, it is imperative I keep at it. The timing is critical. We want to conduct this work while the Sasquatch are moving through the environment and before the roads are cleared and the area is open to tourism and the weekend warriors. I do believe the Sasquatch were delayed in their migration. We had a significant amount of snow late in the season, and it did not melt off until only very recently. And as I mentioned numerous times, I believe the Sasquatch avoid moving through heavy snow, which is primarily why they tend to hang out just below the snow line. These creatures are incredibly large, and they are very likely moving together in a family group, so the physical evidence is there. We need to find it. As I began my long journey home, I stopped off at my encounter location from March 3rd, 2020. However, I did not venture too far into the environment. It was getting late, and I do not believe the Sasquatch are in the area. However, I will be venturing to the nest site in the near future to see if I can ascertain if the Sasquatch had utilized a nest this past season. One of the most important aspects in Sasquatch research is timing. Animals are predictable. They have clearly defined movement patterns as they search for food, water, and shelter during seasonal changes. And if we can pinpoint these movement patterns, we have a very good shot at being able to predict where these animals will be located at any given time. And I am firm in my belief the Sasquatch also have migratory movement patterns, and once we are able to identify these routes, we are going to be much closer to locating them. I'm Darren Smith, and I'll see you here next time on Squatchspot.